So, good morning, everybody. This morning we've got Gene Akers with us. Um, I met Gene, I'd say, a number of years ago at the National Outdoor Recreation Conference. Um, Gene, why don't you tell us? I know we were just talking, but tell us what you're doing or where you're at these days professionally.
Okay, so professionally, I'm old. So I'm not well, according to Social Security and my pensions from previous jobs, I'm semi-retired. But I still love my work enough that I didn't really want to quit. So I work part-time for a consulting firm out of Portland, Oregon. But I live in Audubon, Pennsylvania, so southeastern Pennsylvania, Philadelphia suburb. Um, I do park planning work for local municipalities, local governments, counties, park districts, cities, towns, that sort of thing. Um, yeah, so I all during COVID, I've basically been working from a home office,
Mhm.
except when the COVID occurrences were low last summer, I traveled a bit for several different projects in Washington and Oregon. And I still get out there because I just love the Pacific Northwest, so I still get out there to go hiking and backpacking and stuff.
Sure. Yeah.
Combine that with my work. So,
Well, I figured a good way to do this is kind of trace your professional history a little bit. Um, where are you originally from? Where did you grow up, or uh,
so
where would you call
yeah.
home?
Okay. Well, I'll give you the timeline really
Sure,
basic.
yeah, that'd be great.
So many decades ago, I grew up in actually southeastern Pennsylvania, in Devon, Pennsylvania, where there's a famous horse show and whatever. Spent the first 18 years of my life there. Um, Not much else to talk about there. I thought I was going to go be a vet because when I was growing up, I don't know if most of you have ever heard of Jane Goodall, but she was my idol. And I thought, God, I want to go be a vet. I want to do what she does. Little did I know, she's not a vet. That has nothing to do with what she
Yeah.
does. So I looked at a bunch of schools. I was a mediocre student. I figured, oh, heck, what am I going to get into? I'm obviously not going to get into Cornell or some Ivy League school. So I applied to three different schools. I got into Ohio State as an out of state student, and that was the cheapest of the places that I got into. And being somewhat frugal, I went to Ohio State University sight unseen. That was cultural shock for me because I grew up in sort of the hilly Piedmont of southeastern Pennsylvania, and I went out to Ohio, central Ohio, that was flat, and I characterized it as cows and concrete. So those were your two choices. Anyway, I learned as a freshman that actually I didn't want to be a vet. And I figured, what else do I want to do? Well, if it was the Jane Goodall thing, it was more of a wildlife biologist. So as I was taking my required freshman orientation classes, they said, well, here's the different jobs in natural resources and conservation and theoretically wildlife biology. And the positions that you could apply for back then, if you had a bachelor's in natural resources or wildlife management, they had like 5,000 applicants and it paid minimum wage. And there was no way I was going to go through 4 years of school and not be able to get a job. So I opted to do a minor in natural resources and chose horticulture as my major because I
Okay.
figured, there's a lot of career opportunities in horticulture and I could be creating outdoor spaces and gardens, etc. So I got a bachelor's and a master's degree in horticulture while I was there, and basically spent the next 18 years as I would say, landscape gardener, landscape designer, um, certified arborist, licensed tree expert, tree climber, landscape contractor, you name it, in a variety of places. Built decks and just worked on creating outdoor spaces.
Yeah.
After about 2 decades, I got really frustrated because I was not a landscape architect, and they did not allow landscape horticulturists, even with a master's degree, who specialize in trees and certified arborists, to actually do tree planting plans for new subdivision designs. I
Okay.
thought this is really stupid. I have to be a licensed landscape architect, and they don't even take, natural. They don't even take tree identification classes. They don't know plant physiology. They don't know squat,
Yeah.
which landscape architects are kind of notorious for not knowing their plans. But I was excluded from that work, and I had been working for some engineering firms and consulting for them, and they said, hey, we can't use you anymore because you don't have the stamp. So I went back to school because the only way I got a stamp was to have a landscape architecture degree from an accredited university, and then to do a 2-year internship, and then take the test for licensure. So I went back to school. At this point, we'd moved back and forth across the country over those 2 decades. We were back in Pennsylvania then. I went to Temple University, got a lot of credit for my other 2 degrees, and in a short period got just a bachelor's in landscape architecture. I said, okay, just do that. Did a 2-year internship with a local planning firm and learned a lot about land planning.
Mm-hmm.
And ordinances and the subdivision process and the development process, and sort of why I considered the system broken for land use and growth, stormwater runoff, you name it, all the things that really get messed up when we apply our land development processes on the land. So while I was doing that into that sort of 2-year required before taking the test and getting my landscape architecture license, I also learned a lot about planning. So at the same time I was becoming a landscape architect, took the test, then went to work for a county because now I was a licensed landscape architect. And then I took the test to be a certified planner. So this was all in the, mid 90s.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm now a certified planner and a licensed and registered landscape architect in 4 different states because we moved around and I would transfer that licensure. But I evolved from basically gardening to landscape architecture to planning, land use planning. While I was still practicing in Pennsylvania, I became a certified instructor for subdivision and land development ordinance training for planning commissioners. Pennsylvania has a system where it's a commonwealth. There are 1,500 different local governing bodies across the state that they decide how they want land use to happen and how their zoning works, how subdivision works. So I would run these programs with the Pennsylvania Municipal Planners Education Institute, PMPEI, to help train citizen planners on how their community can grow and what the legal framework is for how they can determine the future of their community. So I did that for a number of years, worked for a landscape architecture firm for a number of years, still in Pennsylvania. Then we moved to New England, and I went to teach at a little graduate school there to teach landscape architecture and GIS and graphics in a program that was focused on ecological land use, ecological planning, little graduate school in Western Massachusetts called the Conway School of Landscape Design. And I was there for 4 years. They changed to director. I love that program, very pedagogical, wonderful place to learn time management, project management, basic planning processes, really in depth. It's a 10-month intense graduate program.
Okay.
And it was a wonderful program until they changed directors, and the director decided he really didn't like me. I was too assertive, and he had issues with women, and he's just anyway. I won't get into that. Nutty kind of guy. So after a year of putting up with him, my husband said, "I hate the snow in Western Massachusetts. It snows a lot, so let's go somewhere else. Where do you want to go?" By that time, our kids were grown up. They were off to college or in graduate school, or we were empty nested completely, and so we moved out to Vancouver. Because he said, find a job and try to find a job in a city that does not have an insurance corporation, because they keep trying to hire me and I don't want to work for an insurance company anymore. So we moved out to Vancouver, Washington, because they were doing a major capital project with their city. And I shifted from being a landscape architect and a land use planner to being a park planner, and really learned a lot about, while I'd been trained in site design, now I was looking at overall systems, park systems, and how do you align a park system, parks, trails, open space, with a particular community, And what are you looking at? And what are those processes? Everything from the political realm you work in to the financial realm that you're working in to integrating with the public, and then designing the actual parks. We had a major $58 million capital project with a levy that had passed. And so that was a major park building process for a combined city and county, Clark County,
Okay.
City of Vancouver. Then the city and the county got a divorce. They had this interlocal agreement that created this park department that I was part of. And I thought, I don't want to go with either one of these by themselves. They're too small. And that's when I started working for Conservation Techniques, which is the firm I work for now. And we do this kind of special system-wide planning for local municipalities. And I love it. It's great. That's kind of the timeline.
Sure. So how long have you been with Conservation Techniques? Because I want to say when I first met you is about the time you probably transitioned to that, I would guess.
Yeah, it probably is. I think it was 2013, maybe.
Okay. Yep. Yeah.
Maybe something like that. And I just went to work for him for Steve because he used to work for Vancouver Clark Parks and Recreation Department as a park planner, and then he went off on his own, and he'd been on his own for probably 6 years, 7 years. His wife was my park planner because I ran that division. And so I just knew him in passing, and he said, "Hey, I could use your help while you're looking for another job."
Mm-hmm.
And I was looking for another job. I was interviewing for other jobs. I had a few possibilities. None of them really panned out. And I said, "Yeah, sure. I'm sick of this city. The divorce is going to be finalized in another month. Let me jump ship before that happens." So I was working for him really as a bridge job.
Sure.
He was booked. It was at the time was pretty close to full time. It paid hourly. It paid twice as much. But I was working sort of on a contract basis, technically, I guess, on the payroll. But what it's evolved to be is a part-time kind of pick and choose job that's ideal for me. I go out, I do the physical assessments.
Mm-hmm.
So as a landscape architect, I can walk through a particular park facility and say, this doesn't meet ADA requirements. This particular piece of infrastructure is not working well. You're missing signs over here. What are the things that are working well? What are the things that are sort of the good, bad, and ugly of the physical
Sure.
traits within a park? And then we tabulate all that with inventory. We do a matrix of different conditions to help people understand, well, this is the system you have. Here's what you really better fix for public safety. Here are things you should fix if you want people to enjoy it. And through the public involvement process in this planning, we then find out here's what your community really wants to see in the parks for them to continue to enjoy it and to enjoy it more.
Yeah.
If the demographics are changing or whatever. So I do everything from the physical to the interaction with public groups, stakeholder groups, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, so with your current position, what have been some of your favorite projects to work on? Or some of those that were challenging and you saw a big reward, I guess, is another way to look at that.
Okay. From a professional perspective, there was a project when I worked actually for a landscape architecture firm in Pennsylvania where we had to do a master recreation plan for a state park that had been undeveloped for 20 years. Because when they purchased the property through a bond back in the 70s, the intent was to create open water recreation for residents in central Pennsylvania to keep them from spending their money at the Jersey Shore.
Okay.
So the idea was everybody's spending money on boats and they want to go to the ocean, they want to go to open water, and we don't want them migrating with all their vacation and tourist spending to a different state. So this bond was approved and they bought a bunch of land along a lot of creeks and waterways. And this particular one in central Pennsylvania, the waterway happened to be polluted. There were a lot of septic issues there. It just was bad. So they couldn't build the dam in the early 70s because they would have had a toxic reservoir.
Yeah.
So they spent 20 years cleaning up this watershed. And politically, everybody's looking forward to having this reservoir where people will come and spend money, yada, yada. Well, over the 20 years, a lot of things came into play. The Clean Water Act Endangered Species Act. So now this creek, which has been cleaned up, the Army Corps of Engineers says to this community, you can't build a dam here. There's bog turtles here. There's these spotted salamanders here, and you would be flooding out their habitat. And you don't have a good enough reason for it. Recreation was not a good enough reason. So basically, the dam couldn't be built on this state park that state parks had owned, but had basically been neglecting for 20 years. So we came in a very adversarial community because they were pissed that their farms had been condemned, land had been taken by the government to create this thing that never happened, and politicians had sort of hung their hats on this whole thing. So I got to come in as the planner from some city coming into the rural area to try to create something that was as good an alternative for them. And that was very controversial, very adversarial. I think I thrived on it because I basically said, okay, what are your issues? Tell us what the different situation is. Tell us what the opportunities are. What are things you like to do? A lot of hunters and fishermen and farmers. And they started to see this as we evolved. People were listening to them. They weren't going to listen to state parks. They weren't happy with state parks. So as the outside consultant, I could kind of, bring out, it's kind of like pulling teeth, bring out their issues to come up with a plan that really focused a lot on trails, water trails, biking trails, hiking trails. The Appalachian Trail went through this site, and they started to see it as, oh, there's economic development here. People are going to come to our community. They're going to spend money. They're going to be doing trail stuff, not open waters, not boats, which I find kind of exclusive to only those people who can do boats.
Yeah.
So it was a little more inclusive. It connected things. It didn't prohibit a lot of the activities that have been going on there for 20 years. So that was a really fun project. You could really sink your teeth into it. The draft plan got approved. The final plan got approved. They've started to make some improvements over the last, it's been another 20 years now. But it's slow based on state government having the funds that may or may not have for state parks, but it's getting there. So that was a good one. Another good one, I would say, I'd go to St. George, Utah. We did a project for them, and this is a town that is growing still a great deal. It's where a lot of folks from Salt Lake City and from California come to recreate. Beautiful, warm weather, although in the summer, warm weather's like 105. It's kind of hot, but it's a year-round place, and it's particularly attractive for people to go in the winter. And they have massive trail system. They have beautiful parks. So for me, part of the fun was working with the different entities, the city, the school district, their superintendents, the county officials. BLM was part of that. There were some other governmental agencies that were sort of collaborative for the desert tortoise, and there were just a number of different collaborations that we had to work on to say, hey, how are you guys going to work with these other guys and some nonprofits and stuff. It was a complicated system, but it was a beautiful system. So one of the things I love, not only working with those different stakeholders, but the system was wonderful. And I spend my days walking through these facilities and walking all the trails, getting a sense of how much people are enjoying it, sitting at the pickleball courts where people are telling me how much they love pickleball, and they want a whole nother 24-court pickleball complex so they can draw in more people and have more tournaments, whatever. Anyway, for me, Parks and Recreation is a place where the characters that I deal with, for the most part, they love their work. They're enthusiastic about their work. They know it's a quality of life issue. So, plus I can dress very informally. I love that. I'm outdoors a lot. I think it's like playing for a job. So.
Yeah. So I guess that this is kind of your career path is taken a little bit different than a lot of folks, right? We're getting more into the landscape architecture, the planning side of it all. What are some of the things that looking back that you think whether it was a decision you made or a training or something you did or did not do? What are some things that you might say that you wish it had done differently or taken a different path, or you know what I mean by that?
Yeah, I do know what you mean, and I ask that question to myself once in a while. Um, but I look at the path I've made, and I've sort of gone a little bit like doing switchbacks up a mountain.
Hmm.
And every so often you go off and you want to go see the waterfall, and then you come back, and it was good to get off the path and go see that waterfall, or get off the path and see the Serpentine Barrens, or whatever, whatever the thing might be. So I would look back and I wouldn't regret the path I've taken and the training I've had. The other piece would be because it's unusual training. So I have a lot of horticultural skills, a lot of plant knowledge. That's helped me a great deal to um, be sort of foundational support to landscape architecture and design, site design.
Hmm.
I put that together with the site design and then understanding the legal framework that we do land development in and that planning aspect of things. They've all worked together to sort of enhance my ability to do the work I do. The other piece I would say is having these different technical backgrounds allows me to speak the different languages of the different professionals I'm working with. And that's really important. If I had just taken the landscape architecture path straight, or the planning path straight, or maybe a parks and recreation path with no deviations, I would not be as versatile or articulate in communicating with other people and being able to collaborate and coordinate with other professionals. So it helps that I've sat in a lot of these different seats. I've worked for government, I've worked for nonprofits, I've worked in academia, I've worked for private contractors, I've worked for consultants, and they all have a different perspective. So it really helps to be able to understand where everyone else is coming from.
And I agree. Something that I think is, being comfortable with different audiences is something I think about a lot. Is when I'm talking to, when I'm talking with or in a meeting with or whatever, you get these different audiences, and talking about talk their language or be comfortable in that
Right.
situation is a big deal. Um, I gave in one of my classes, I was talking to students about I was doing some GIS work in southeast Oklahoma, and just being able to talk about some of the local stuff that's there uh, opened a different world of communication with some of
Mhm.
the park staff. That I wasn't the guy from the city. I really
Right,
wasn't from the city, but I wasn't the outsider coming in to try to tell them what to do. Now I was connecting with them in some way, and that
right, right.
beyond talking their language, it opened door for future communication.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, that's huge.
so the other before I let you go, the other thing I was want to talk to you about for just a few minutes is professional association and professional development,
Mhm.
and I know that's how you and I met. What is your philosophy when it comes to involvement or participation in those professional associations?
So now my interest and commitment is tapering off, I would say. But it's because I'm older and semi-retired and whatever. I'm still I still keep my licensure active. I'm still a member of the American Planning Association. I'm a member of the uh, American Trails, and I was a member of SORP until the last 2 or 3 years, I think it's been.
No.
Uh, but in all of the time that ever since I finished graduate school, I have always looked to whatever that entity is, whether it was the American Nurserymen's Association, whether it was my state association of landscape contractors or nurserymen. Always joined, always attended annual conferences whenever possible. These days now, I do a lot of webinars. I still do webinars at the age of 67. I'm still learning new things. I
Yeah.
can't stop. Although some of the things I'm learning have more personal interest rather than professional interest. But keeping that saw sharp, keeping my brain sharp, and networking with other professionals, learning how they're doing it, that's pretty critical. I've met too many professionals that had never chased continuing ed credits or professional development credits, um, which means that they're not licensed in their field or certified in their field, because those are all required. If you're
Yeah.
going to be a certified or licensed landscape architect, you have to do 24 hours every 2 years. And the
Yeah.
same thing is true with being a certified planner. It's a requirement, and I heartily endorse that requirement. It's a huge piece to being effective
Yeah.
and being up to date. So,
I think keeping the saw sharp is a great analogy. I love it.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so, one question before we let you go. If a student or a young professional is watching this and they're thinking, what Jean's done so cool. She's had such a variety, and then you said you looked up to Jane Goodall. There's other folks out there. Like I was talking to a student not too long ago, talked about Steve Irwin, right?
Mhm.
You've got these people that inspire us, kind of like you were inspired. But if they're sitting there, if they're listening to this and they think, oh, she's had such a cool career path. Do you have any like last pieces of advice overall for somebody thinking they might want to go in a similar career path or look at similar options as maybe you've had the opportunity to get involved in?
So I would say don't look at my path because that was just my path. It's going to be irrelevant to anyone else. You have to find what you love doing and see how that can be integrated into what your career path is. Because if you're deciding to go on a certain career path and it's just not floating your boat, you need to deviate from that path.
Yeah.
I've had a couple of jobs where I took them because I was qualified for them. I could get hired, I could get paid. Um, they weren't necessarily super fun or engaging. So, not to pick on local government, but sometimes my planning jobs with local government have not been overly stimulating.
Yeah.
They've been kind of dull. And so what I've done is I look at that job and I say, okay, how can I make this a more sustainable job?
Yeah.
So one of them was I'm going to do the work I'm required to do so efficiently, so effectively that I have free time to be able to create this better job that collaborates with my other planners, furthers some other types of plans. And one example was when I worked for a county, and my job was basically to review subdivisions. And after a while, that gets pretty boring. So I did that in as efficient and effective short period of time as possible during my hourly week. And then I collaborated with the open space planners to do concept plans for county parks and local community parks.
Awesome.
So I could do design. I collaborated with the county planners to help them with some ordinance work they were doing and with the community plan. Anyway, I guess the environmental planners, that was a big one. They were developing model ordinances for stormwater
Hmm.
basins. And so I was using my landscape architecture background, my horticulture and tree background to see how do we integrate naturalizing basins into existing stormwater ordinances. So that's been a biggie for me, stormwater and trying to replicate natural surface hydrology using plants and stuff. So I've taken jobs that were seemingly boring
Yeah.
and I've created and enhanced them because I would figure out a way to sort of subjugate the required part of the job, still get it done really well, figure out what's the most efficient path, and then look for creating something better. So that in all the past jobs I've had, I've always learned something new, and I've been able to take what it was I learned to apply to whatever the next
Yeah.
journey is, the next path, the next direction. So whatever you're doing now, I would just tell you, it's not what you're going to be doing for the rest of your life, more than likely. If you're motivated, if you're interested. I mean, in the case of your professor, he's constantly learning. So, whatever you're doing, think about your job as some place where you want to be constantly learning.
Yeah.
Um, that's going to stimulate you and motivate you and keep you engaged.
Yeah. It was funny you say that the other day. I was talking to somebody. I said, what do you like most about your job? Is it, and it is the fact that no matter what situation I'm in, whether I'm interacting with students or I'm on a committee or I'm doing research, is all those environments I'm in a learning environment.
Yeah.
For different reasons. I learn what the new songs and hip hop music is in some courses, or whatever the pop culture is, and
Right.
but it's a learning environment, and I think that's something that I hold dear to my heart as well. Is I can always, it keeps, I don't know if keeping me young is the right word, but it keeps the saw sharp, you
Yes.
know. So, well, Gene, that's all I have. I
Yeah,
sincerely appreciate you taking your time this morning.
sure.
It's been wonderful to see you, and I'm glad to
Good. Yeah.
hear that
Good to see
you're
you.
close to family out there and back in Pennsylvania again.
Yeah.
So
Back and forth.
maybe next time I talk to you, be like, well, we're in Washington again. I don't know.
Yeah, I might be. Early May, I got to be out there for a week or two. So I'll have had my second vaccination, so I'll be good to go. Woo!
Yeah,
Can't
absolutely.
wait to travel again. Yeah.
Well, if you ever need anything from my way, certainly reach out.
Okay, terrific. We'll
All
do
right.
that.
All right. Have a
Thanks,
good morning,
Mike.
Gene. Thank you.
You too. You
Bye
bet.
bye.
Bye all.